Good morning, Rich. Welcome from the East Coast, I guess, huh?
Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Good to be with you, man. I'm a longtime fan of your father's. You know this. We've been connected for some time. I wanted to talk about your rich writing history and chat a little bit about the craft and how you get it done and how you've enjoyed such a strong career. And I want to open, if it's okay, let's go back to your dad. He was a champion negotiator. He wrote a confession. I don't tell many people this. When I was a young man trying to figure life out, I read a book by your father, and I think the title was something like How to Really, Really Care, but Not Too Much.
Huh.
A book about negotiation. Do you remember the title?
Yeah. Well, probably, I don't know exactly how old you are, but you probably read his first book was called You Can Negotiate Anything. Or, oh yeah, you would be talking about his second book, Negotiate This, which is by caring but not that much, which is his sort of philosophy and his slogan, which is kind of a detachment and not getting too, playing at life like it's a game.
Which
And
is the
and
key to negotiation because if you get
yeah,
emotionally attached to it, you can't walk away, and then you're almost guaranteed to lose. But that
yeah,
walk away mentality is so valuable. Anyway, I learned it from your dad.
yeah.
Same time I was picking up Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar and all those guys. But your dad was kind of a quieter marketer, I think. I don't know who was looking after him. He did a lot of talks as well, did he?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's a little early. His book was a huge, huge book, and um, he was, he worked for the government a lot. He was involved in the START talks, and he was negotiating.
Yeah.
So, like the whole thing of speaking to the public, that came about later in his career, almost by accident, because he decided to write the book, and he discovered this market of, his whole thing was always negotiate. Everybody's negotiating all the time.
That's right.
You're negotiating even if you don't know it. You're playing in a game even if you don't know a game is going on. You know, so it was always about ordinary life. But he had this career of worked for businesses, worked for companies, represented, worked with the NFL Players Union, worked with the Umpires Union in baseball, worked on the Star Talk for the government. So he was never really focused on this other market, this general market, and that's probably why he didn't know him as well. Um,
I had a sense that he was uh, doing a lot of things he couldn't talk about. Is that true?
yeah, yeah. So, and then he loves to talk, and he would have public seminars when he realized there was a need for him, where anybody can go see him talk. I worked at some of those when I was a kid, handing stuff out and helping get people seated and all that. So, if he had been now in the age of the internet and everything, probably would be made for him because he's very aphoristic, like sayings and slogans and ideas that stick in your head.
Oh yeah, he was
Um,
Mr. Soundbite, and he had that
right.
that Jewish delivery that everybody loves. You know, it's ageless.
Yeah. Well, it's like a guy talking to, Brooklyn Deli, which is kind of where he's from. So
That's right.
that's his thing. So it's just who he is.
Can
So
you
I just
talk?
think that, yeah.
Can you talk about? I mean, I don't even know where I'm getting into here. How secret, top secret was his stuff? Can you talk about it today? Can you give
I
a?
mean, it wasn't so top secret in that he wasn't like, it was the State Department negotiating. This is what I'm aware of, because I was a kid. Mostly when you're a kid, you're not paying attention on what your parents are doing. You don't care. I
Right.
mean, you're paying attention on your own friends. So the point where I became aware of what he was doing, he was involved in helping the government do what he did for businesses and what he did for people. And the same reason you were attracted to him, which is they were at an impasse kind of with the Soviet Union and lowering the number of missiles, nuclear missiles. This was Ronald Reagan really wanted to lower the amount of missiles. He had a common sense approach to why do we have all these weapons that can destroy the earth 1,000 times over. So they sort of brought him in as kind of like same thing you're saying, like a guy that not normally he's not an academic. He's a guy from Brooklyn who's been out originally just negotiating on the street basically for when he worked for insurance companies and stuff. So bring in sort of a different kind of energy and see if we can negotiate and stuff. Now all that stuff's classified technically,
Mm.
but everything the government does is classified almost. So and then it became public with the START talks, became public, and they were successful. And I think that they were. I think just now they're being sort of broken. I mean, they lasted for one of his things is you want to negotiate in a way that the deal sticks and it lasts, you know? A very simple example of this would be, I was needed to buy a house. My wife and I had our third kid. We had all these little kids. We were living in New York. We needed more space. We sold our apartment. So now we have a clock, and we started trying to buy houses. And every house we would make an offer, and there would be a bidding war, which we would lose. And we were running out of time. And finally I said, let's just offer the asking price, get this one house and have this over with. And I did that. And he laughed at me. He said, you're not getting that house. And I said, why? He said, because those people aren't going to be happy you gave them the asking price. They're just immediately going to think we didn't ask for enough. And they're going to start looking for a way out of the deal. And that's exactly what happened. Because he always said, like, when you have this thing, when you buy a house, when you go up a little, they go down a little, you go up, down. You always think it's this kind of time-wasting routine that's very annoying when you both know what the price is going to be. And he explained to me that it's not about money. And that's what he always said. It's not about the money. It's the money. It's not about saving money or it's about making the other side think that they got the best possible deal for their house they can get. So they walk away feeling, oh, we did a great job, and it sticks. And same on your side, that you got them to come down more than they were comfortable with. You got an amazing deal. So on both sides, it sticks. If either side walks away feeling I was just ripped off, they're going to look for a way out of the deal. So that's why the fact that the Start Talks, which he approached the same way,
Yeah.
lasted for so many years, through the end of the Cold War and everything, is a testament to his involvement in that.
Yeah, a true win-win. There's an old joke about that you probably know. It's not about the money, it's about the amount.
Right. Funny.
I was just going to ask you if you use your dad's negotiation techniques to this day with your publishing deals and the different things that you've done with television. I imagine it's a like a default setting for you to.
Not really. I've
Oh,
never been comfortable doing it. I'm
oh,
not good at it. I come from, and also one of the main things he said is that I always stuck with is you should never negotiate for yourself
ah,
because you care too much.
that's right.
You're too invested in the outcome. It's wrapped up with your identity and your sense of self. It gets personal.
So you
So
went through
when
an agent and a
I
publishing.
have I have an agent, and just the idea that anybody would give me anything to write a book, to publish my words, I'd be excited just that they made the offer.
Yeah,
So I would end up with a very bad deal if I negotiated for myself.
I think a lot of artists, we would write whether we were paid or not. We would play music whether we were paid to perform or not.
Also, something he said, my dad said, that always sticks with me, that is really true for this is, you know, the key to success, a lot of it is living with ambiguity.
Say that again.
Living with ambiguity,
Living with ambiguity.
uncertainty, insecurity, not knowing what's going to happen. And you can sort of get rid of that ambiguity and uncertainty, but it will cost you actual money.
Hmm.
So what that means is, and that's really hard if you're a writer, I think, because you're selling something that nobody needs, which is really hard to do. It's not like you're selling water or food or something. You're selling something nobody needs. So there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of not knowing where your next paycheck's going to come from. And you can then feel better about that by rushing off and signing some deal to get some money and get rid of the ambiguity, but you end up getting ripped off. Whereas you
Yeah.
have to wait and live with the insecurity to ultimately get to be successful. And I've always think about that.
There's an old story about Harry Nielsen talking to Bob Dylan, and Harry was young and had a lot of issues himself. He was chasing Dylan for the answers because he's talking to, the guru, and he just keeps pestering Dylan with questions. And Dylan at one point becomes so impatient, he just says to him, "What makes you think you need to understand everything?"
Right.
And that reminds me of this sense of ambiguity. You can go through life and just do your best and not have to understand everything.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
also you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know where you are
can't
in
know.
your own story. So you might feel like you're at a very low point and you're at the end. But if you were to step back and you could get a bigger picture of where you are, you might be, you know, right at the edge of something great happening.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And this would just be a build up to it that you would never even know.
I love it. Your new book is called The Story of Jennifer Doulos, Murder in the Dollhouse. I thought it was called Murder in the Dollhouse, but you had to get the Doulos name in there. Was there some crafting to the
Well,
title?
it's called Murder in the Dollhouse.
Oh, it is.
That's the title.
I
Yeah.
thought I saw a cover that said The Story of Jennifer Doulos.
You know what? What you probably saw if you go search my name, that's an AI copy of my book,
Okay. How's
which
that, how's
I
that
complained
selling?
about. I have no idea. It's probably selling as well as my book, and it's very very irritating, and it's unbelievable that it's allowed to happen. I
Yes.
was joking because no one could stop it. I'm like, listen, if I were to go to the mall near where I live in Connecticut, and I were to set up a little stand selling fake J. Crew items in front of the J. Crew store, somebody would stop me.
Uh, so for those that don't know, Jennifer Doulos was, well, you tell the story, man. She was murdered,
She
and
was The way I heard the story first is not as a writer or journalist or anything, as a parent. We live in a town in Connecticut next to where she lived. She lived in one of the richest towns in America called New Canaan. We live not in that town, but in a kind of like a step lower, couple steps lower. Very beautiful town, just not that intensity to it, called Ridgefield. But it's close enough that our kids play against their kids in sports, and it's close.
yeah.
So when you first heard it, it was a missing persons story, which is this mother, we didn't know anything about her, named Jennifer Doulos, five kids, all little kids, two sets of twins, and then a youngest, had dropped her kids off at the New Canaan Country School, which is a super fancy $60,000 a year private school, and then vanished. So this was a nightmare. First of all, there's the voyeuristic thing of what happened, but it's a nightmare for parents because it's the most mundane activity. And then it quickly turned into a missing persons, into a murder story.
Rich, remind us
And
of the year. When did this happen?
this happened 6 years ago.
Okay.
That's when she disappeared. Memorial weekend 6 years ago. So 2019.
Okay.
So, and then the whole story came in about her husband. She was still married, but it was a really bad marriage in the middle of a really bad divorce. These were very kind of perfect people for a newspaper story in that they were both, the husband and the wife were great looking, really beautiful people. They had met originally at Brown. She came from a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
Her aunt was Liz Claiborne. Her father was a super successful business guy. There was a lot of money. They were connected to a lot of people. And this guy who was a Greek national and an American citizen too, had gone to Brown in Columbia, had brutally murdered her in her own garage. They had separated in New Canaan. So as I reported on the story for Airmail magazine as it was breaking, it was kind of like an in cold blood type story. But then when I went back to write the book, I kind of looked into her and I found out her incredibly sympathetic, incredibly interesting, and then kind of incredibly brilliant. And she was a writer who'd been in New York at the same time as me. We had a lot of connections and a lot of the same friends were at the same parties and everything. And I felt like I understood her and understood her whole trajectory and her struggle to have this kind of dream life, which she had since she was a little girl, of having the perfect marriage, the perfect kids, the perfect house. And that was the dollhouse, because she collected dollhouses when she was a kid and was obsessed with dollhouses, and also wanted to be a writer. And it was, for me, it was, as a writer, she wrote what she thought. So you had access to her thoughts, which is, super unusual, and her own work. And she wrote about the thing I'm talking about. She said that she read the wedding pages in the New York Times like men would read the sports pages. She was obsessed with the perfect marriage and her parents' perfect marriage. So when I wrote the book, I felt like it could be a different kind of true crime book, because I'm not really a true crime writer, that it would be less focused on the death than on the life of these people. Because I felt like by only understanding who she was and caring about her, understanding her as a person, would you realize what a tragedy this had been and how unnecessary this had been. So, and not just focusing on the worst hour, the worst day of her life. And of course, the story isn't really entirely complete, because the woman who was the other woman, the paramour, who has a lot of very vocal defenders, but seemingly was an accomplice to the murder, while I was doing this, was on trial and was convicted as an accomplice to murder, and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. And the search for Jennifer's body still goes on. And this was a very impactful case where I lived, caused a new law to be passed called Jennifer's Law, about you don't have to physically abuse somebody for it to be considered abuse.
Interesting.
There's something called coercive control, where anybody that's been a victim of it would recognize it, male or female, which is when somebody's mentally torturing you.
Yeah.
And you're in the same house as them.
So much to unpack here. You remind me, I love the twist about not focusing so much on the sensationalistic merits of the murder itself, but their lives.
Yeah.
I interviewed a co-author from a book called Remember the Alamo. It's about the revisionist version of Alamo and how it was portrayed that a bunch of heroes like Crockett and William Travis and Jim Bowie holed up in this fort. And it turns out these guys weren't everything that everybody thought they were. They had problems. Some of them were scoundrels. And it wasn't the best decision. It wasn't exactly heroic what they did. It was more of an accident. And then they were martyred. But they came in a different door. They in the whole book, Rich, they spend maybe 15 pages on the actual Battle of the Alamo.
Right. Well, because the Alamo is interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but it's interesting because Texas needed a founding myth.
That's right.
So people took the bare bones of what happened, and that's what writers do. They turned it into a founding myth. And then every society has that. Every nation has that. And then somebody comes along later and will say, hey, this isn't really what happened, you know. And it's interesting, and it's also pretty dangerous too, because you undermine the foundation that the whole thing is built on. And then you think, well, shouldn't be built on a lie, but you realize everything built is built on somebody's version of what happened.
Yes.
And that history is basically people say it's written by the winners. It's not so much written by the winners, in my opinion. It's a story that sticks, man. It's a story people need.
History is written by the writers.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote it.
History is the story that sticks.
Yeah.
Story that you remember. You know,
Yeah.
and think about it like sometimes you remember something very vividly and you go back and check it and you have key details wrong.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason is because your brain, I think, turns it into a better story.
Yes.
Like smooths out all the little contradictions. The fact that I don't remember. I've read something about like Davy Crockett was like not a great guy or something. I forget all the he wasn't. Was it Sam Bowie there? Was Bowie there too?
Jim Bowie. You're thinking of Sam Houston, maybe.
No, I'm thinking of the basketball player.
He wasn't there.
Yeah. So anyway, so.
And I like your point, but back to your premise for the book is let's not focus on the grisly part. Let's focus on things like this woman as a person and how she made the decision to marry this guy that turned out to be not such a good. And I imagine you spent some time on where he came from and how he got to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, first of all, everybody focuses on the killers in these books. And I understand why. First of all, usually the victim is dead and the killer's alive.
Yes.
So that's a big advantage in getting attention. Okay. But this was slightly different because Jennifer had written all these things. You know what I mean? So you did get access to her. And then second of all, when you're dealing with a killer like this, you're dealing with the question of evil, which is interesting, charismatic, and it's just an interesting thing. And I would sort of say he's a psychopath, and there's never been a boring psychopath. They're not boring,
No.
you know. So for all those reasons, but she's fascinating to me because not only was she super interesting, but she's like us. It's like you know her. She's very familiar. Her insecurities are my insecurities. Her fears about not succeeding, about disappointing her parents, about wanting to write the truth but not wanting to hurt people who are alive.
Her zip code may have been your zip code.
Yeah, and it was just very close. You know, I mean, I didn't have all those things that she had, and I come from Chicago, but I have cousins in New York who have way more money than we do.
Yeah.
And they live in a different way. And I felt like this was like one of my New York cousins.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a terrific book. I apologize, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but this podcast will get people to read it, and I appreciate you putting it together. One more question about this before we go on to the other great things you've done. How does a person like you, and I understand you did a piece for Airmail, and by the way, sidebar, I assume Graydon Carter recruited you from Vanity Fair because I know you did some good work for him back in the day.
Well, when Graydon left Vanity Fair, I just was going to go wherever Graydon went.
Oh.
because that's all that really matters is people.
I
You know,
did
that's
read
the
his
whole thing.
book, and he is big on relationships.
Yeah, well, and I agree with that. And I feel like for whatever reason, because of the market or whatever, Vanity Fair, they came to him and basically said, you've got to do this a lot cheaper. You've got to get rid of a lot of people. You got to change. This is just what I heard. I don't know exactly. And he basically said, I'm not going to spend the last part of my career undoing what I did in the middle part of my career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the point in that? And he quit. He left instead on his own terms. And nobody does that. I
No.
mean, everybody sticks around till the bitter end, man. Everybody wants to be the last person alive on the lifeboat, it seems like. But
Yeah.
it really impressed me the way he did that. And I kept in touch with him when he was gone for a year. And then he came back and I was just assumed I was going to write for him. And I did. And this story, the Jennifer Doulos story, it was his idea. I mean, he called and he said, would you write about this? Because he knew I lived right there. And I already, of course, was following it, like I said, as a parent. And at first, I didn't want to write about it. And I sort of hesitated because I felt like it was too close. I don't like writing about people being murdered and all that.
Yeah.
But I was reading the coverage. And when I got the arrest warrants and read all the stuff that was just being written, that wasn't being written about, because the newspapers are in such a hurry, they just write about the top line.
Yeah.
And it was all these little status details about life as we know it, life as we live it. I think of them as like the Tom Wolfe details,
Yeah.
like how important the schools are, the private schools, the money, the cars, you know, who's up, who's down, what different towns mean about where you are in your life, all that stuff, which nobody likes to admit that they think about, but most people will do think about it, was in that. It was like a mirror of my own generation and my own life. And the fact is, Jennifer Doulos was born like a month before me or something, and Fotis Doulos was born around the same time. And I come from Generation X, and we're a small generation demographically, and we don't get written about very much. But you feel like when you're writing about a real contemporary who grew up in the country you did, because the country changed. My kids grew up in a different country than I grew up in. You feel like you can understand them in an almost, without even thinking so much about it, in a way that you can't with other people who are older or younger.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to ask you about the Doulos case. How does a guy like you or any writer, I understand the initial interest. I understand it was an assignment if you chose to accept it, like Mission Impossible. But how do you actually get your feet wet in it? How do you get the arrest warrants? How do you find out enough people are willing to talk to you? Sidebar question. You think about these great writers, these great historical writers, and all of a sudden there's a new book about Thomas Jefferson. I assume they get access to a stash of letters that nobody had before. There has to be some sort of new content available, or somebody maybe like you that does some good digging.
Well, I've written almost every kind of nonfiction book at this point, and every one is different. So you can learn certain skills, but it's like you got to learn all new skills for all different books, all different challenges. My thing is I just try to I think of a nonfiction book as like a rope, and you want to get as many different strands as you can. And the more you can get, the bigger, the thicker the rope, and the more
Okay.
solid the rope you can read. This story, as far as reporting it goes, when I first wrote about it, it was breaking news. It was ultimately, and this isn't a surprise because I say it at the beginning of the book, and anybody would know, Fotis Doulos killed himself instead of going to prison.
Yeah.
Okay. Or to jail. So, and that happened while I was already writing the story. So basically, it was breaking news, and I covered it like that. When I decided to write the book, I thought I would just take these stories I'd written for Airmail, and it was like 12 stories. And they would be collected in a book. And my editor at Farrar Straus, Jonathan Galassi, like one of the best editors in the world, he said, you should dig deeper. And I thought he was kind of nuts because I thought, how much deeper can I dig? But it turns out this is like story, even though it was so in front of everybody's face and in the news and on the cover of the New York Times many times. And there had been a TV, there had been a movie, a Lifetime movie, or a good Lifetime movie, and there had been podcasts and everything. It kind of was unreported
Yeah.
because turns out that some of the people she wrote with and worked with, I wrote with and worked with, and I met all her people that she worked with when she was younger as a writer. None of them had really been interviewed, or they've
Yeah.
interviewed a little bit. It hadn't really been touched. That part of the story hadn't been touched.
Nice.
So it was a combination. This story in particular was, I looked at it as three parts. This is usually when you break, the whole thing is always architecture for writing these kind of books, I think. You got to figure the structure and then you figure out what you need. So the way I looked at it was the first part was about her before she got married. That was the whole first part.
Yeah.
And for that, I had her old friends, I had things she had written and everything else. The second part was about her marriage.
Sorry, when you say you had to reach out to these people and cultivate
Yes,
relationships. You had to
that's
get
what
a
I
yes
mean.
from them.
Yeah, they were there. It's hard to get people to agree to interview. It depends on the story. Depends on the story. So, like, for example, I wanted to get people to talk about Fotis the same way, the husband,
Husband.
and I couldn't. Because nobody wanted to be associated with him because he'd become this villain in the public eye. It would be like if I was writing a book about John Wayne Gacy and found the guy who was his best friend in high school and wanted me to tell him about what John Wayne Gacy was like in high school. He would maybe be like, I don't want to even be in any way associated with that person, So that's really hard, and you don't always succeed, and you have holes in your narrative, and you got to deal with that. If the holes are big enough, maybe you don't write the book, but the main thing is just to be honest with the reader about what you have and what you don't have and what it means that you don't have it. And then the middle part of the book was about her marriage to Fotis Doulos. And for that, there were people that knew them at the time. But more importantly, they went through this divorce where they sort of went into court and they said everything.
Oh.
They just said everything, and they wrote reports about it, and I got access to all of that.
Is that public record divorce proceedings?
Pretty much, yeah.
Because it's because it's a
some stuff was sealed, but mostly it's there. It's public record. You can go get it. You just have to go to the courthouse and get it. And most people don't do that because it's a pain.
Yeah.
And then when you get the actual documents, you're talking about thousands and thousands of pages of documents. The stuff that's relevant and interesting and telling is hidden among all the stuff that's not interesting and boring. So you got to have the patience to go through all that and pick out the good stuff, Yeah. And then the third part was about the murder and the mystery and the investigation. And for that, you have police records and you have the police and the detectives and the people that worked on the case. So you put all those strands together and you've got a story. Yeah, basically.
Wow, impressive.
Yeah.
How many, do you ever track how many hours it takes to write a book like this, or days, or would you just do it in chunks of time?
Dude, that would be like adding up what the weight of all the food you've eaten in your life amounts to. I probably can be done, but you probably wouldn't want to know.
AI will do that for you.
I don't want to know. I'd like to be ignorantly, blissfully ignorant.
What about time frame? A year? 18 months? Somebody told me it takes 18 months to birth a book. Is that a made up number?
No, I mean, that's how much they usually give you on a contract.
Oh.
So maybe that's where the number comes from.
Self-defining.
Every book is different.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about writers that get into some kind of weird trance-like state and they write a book. I think Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road in a couple weeks,
Well,
and yeah, whatever you think. So, but in some books, they take 10, 20 years. It just depends on it just depends on the situation. I don't think there's a uniform number. For me, it usually takes about a year to report it, at least.
Truman Capote said that what Kerouac did was less like writing and more like typing.
Yeah, but that's what people say. You're a little bit jealous.
It's a funny line. Wait, Truman Capote, the guy that didn't write a word after In Cold Blood, he's done, Remember that?
If you read On the Road, which I read when I was a kid, I've read it again, it's great. The writing is great.
Yeah.
And it's free in a way. I love Truman Capote and I love In Cold Blood. But it's not free like that.
No.
So it's whatever. I just think that Truman Capote wanted to be the most famous person, and Jack Kerouac was a little more famous, and it irritated the hell out of him.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go back to your body of work, man. Listen to this, everybody. It starts at the New Yorker. I'm going to leave some stuff out. You do a book about Sweet and Low, the saccharine. You do a book about Jewish gangsters, not in this order. You do a book about a guy called the Banana King. You write about major sports franchises like baseball, NBA, the Chicago Bears. I mean, you ever heard of niching, man? What's the matter with you? You write a book about the Rolling Stones, or was it Vinyl, the TV show?
Rolling Stones. They're connected, but it was a book about the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. I mean, I know very few writers that have this kind of a career arc. I'm in Detroit. Mitch Albom is one of them. He's
Mm.
got a niche now with this novel. It's not really a novel. It's what do they call that story? It's a made up story with a lesson. Parable. What is it?
I guess it's would be well. That's basically storytelling, but that would be you're thinking of like yeah, I think it's a parable, but I know who you mean.
They're involved.
Aesop's fable, like a fable.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of
Very
Aesop's fable, and
successful.
if you ever watched the show when you were a kid, Peabody and Sherman and the Way Back Machine, they had
Yeah.
Aesop come in and do a fable. So when I sound like I'm quoting Aesop, it's not because I'm well educated. It's because I watched a lot of Peabody and Sherman when I was a kid.
It all, it all comes from someplace.
Yeah.
So how did you get this like broad swath? Are you just a man of the world and this stuff intrigues you? You're obviously a super sports fan. You know, your
Well,
Wikipedia page says that you're close to the Rolling Stones. Who writes this?
I don't know who writes
Is
it.
it
I don't
even
know who.
true? Is it true? You're close to
Am
the.
I close to the Rolling? No, I'm not close to the Rolling Stones. I was at a time,
Oh, okay.
and I was when I wrote the book, maybe, or before I wrote the book, and the book was about the time when I was close to the Rolling Stones, and that I was a collaborator on a story with Mick Jagger. We worked together, and I traveled on the road with the Rolling Stones.
That's pretty
So
cool.
I wouldn't put it in the present tense
Right.
because but that was a period in my life that I was writing about, which was like in my late 20s and early, or even like mid 20s to mid 30s, that
Right.
period of time.
So how did you come to this? Do you just write about what you're interested in, or do you not give a.
Well, I read a quote today from Jamaica Kincaid, who's a writer I really admire, in the New York Times, where she said that she thinks people basically are who they are at age 7.
Yes.
And then you just repeat that. And that's, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if I'd set the age at 7, but around then, 9,
Right.
12, something like that. And so everything I've written about is stuff that was it seems like it's not connected, but it's completely connected because it's all the things I was interested in when I was 15 years old. So I was a Rolling Stones fanatic and who got lucky enough to work at Rolling Stones magazine and be sent out to travel with the Rolling Stones and then develop this relationship with them.
Wow.
And I was a Cubs fanatic who was in so much pain that I took solace in the 1985 Bears. You know,
That's a lot of
the
solace.
the Jewish Gangsters is because my father grew up in Bensonhurst and he used to tell me stories about Jewish gangsters in the 1930s instead of normal bedtime stories. So I became obsessed with those stories and the truth. That's kind of revisionist. What was the truth behind those stories? And then also I was hugely influenced. I really loved Goodfellas when it came out.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw Goodfellas when I was on a date. This is like in my early 20s. And I came out and I said, I wish I liked this person I was with and she liked me more. That was the only thing that would make this experience better. But I was hugely affected by it. And like, I wanted to do my own kind of gangster story, but I knew that I couldn't do about Italian gangsters just because they've been done a million times. And I wasn't Italian, but I could do Jewish gangsters because I was Jewish and people didn't know the stories. And it would be a different slant on kind of the underworld. So, and the Sweet and Low story is I told you about my rich cousins. My grandfather invented Sweet and Low, and he invented the sugar packet, and it dissolved into this big family fight, which is what happens every time somebody in the family makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
So all these stories are the stories of my life, and I figure eventually I'll run out of stories. But this Jennifer Doulos thing, it just happened now, but it's still like I felt connected to it personally because of who she was and where it happened.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaker coaching, and as kind of like an adjunct to that, because we were creating good content, they're called signature stories. You know this when people speak, that we were creating chapters for books. I accidentally became a book shepherd, and I wish everybody would learn this. We've talked about it a few times now, just today. This idea of finding the interesting angle to what might be considered a pedestrian topic, a grisly murder, a rock band, a losing season of a sports team. You got to find the interesting angle. Otherwise, what you're putting together is not special.
Yeah, well, and for me, like with the Cubs, because you mentioned a losing sports team, it's like what I realized is that in a way, winning the World Series would be a bit of a disaster for some Cubs fans because their identity is so wrapped up in losing. It wouldn't be special. It'd been so special to be a Cubs fan because it was like we were holier than everyone else because our kingdom is not of this world.
The
So
Mets
if the
have the same
Cubs,
problem.
yeah, but the Mets are an expansion team who beat the Cubs in '69. The Cubs had, I wrote the book, you know, while I was writing the book, I watched the Cubs win the World Series. So the Cubs didn't win the World Series from 1908 until 2016, and they hadn't been in the World Series since 1945, I think, if I'm remembering correct. So the Cubs were unique in like losing franchises, and the only team close to them, I think, was Cleveland, who they played in the World Series. You
Oh,
know, so yeah, I'm basically not. Here's how I see myself. I'm basically not a very smart person, okay, and I feel like I'm a little slow, and I have to learn. This is how I feel. I have to tell myself stories slowly in order to understand them, and that's the process of writing the books, which is I'm explaining to myself how the world works. And I have a very big weakness for colorful stories, colorful characters. So, like example, something that I love is the Cubs when when in the World Series in the '20s. The reason they lost is in a key game in Philadelphia. Their superstar center fielder Hack Wilson dropped two routine fly balls. Okay, and he said that he lost the ball in the sun. And the manager, Joe McCarthy, this famous manager, said he told the reporters to lay off because they were really on him. He said, "What do you want?" He said the sun got in his eyes, and he didn't put the sun up there.
oh, that's
So
good.
like, it's great, and it's so deep. It's like take your problem up with God, the guy who put the sun up there. You know?
Yeah, nice twist. You
Yeah.
said something cool a minute ago. This whole interview is cool, but you said something special. You said you didn't say it quite this way, but you implied writing more slowly,
Yeah.
deeper somehow. I've heard it described different ways. Write in all five senses. Don't just tell people what you saw. How did it smell? How
Right.
did it feel? What was the atmosphere like? Uh, I got some great golf advice one time. I was on the course, and you're never supposed to offer people advice unless they ask for it. That's the golf rule, everybody.
As someone who's received much unsolicited advice on the golf course, I can attest to
Yeah, so I'm shanking and slicing,
that.
and
Right.
and finally I've had enough. Even if my other three guys in my foursome haven't had enough, I've had enough. And I said to the best guy, I said, "What am I doing wrong?"
Yeah.
And he thinks for a second. And he goes, "Well, first of all, thank you for asking." And then he says, "Try swinging more slowly."
Yeah, that's the key. I
And
do that. That's what I.
And it reminded me, and the idea, everybody, is that because you're swinging more slowly, you get outside your head a little bit and you start thinking about the fundamentals instead of just whacking the
Right.
ball as hard as you can. Same thing with writing, that if you take your time, word substitution, is one sentence really leading into the next sentence? The rhythm of the sentences, the cadence, am I using enough alliteration? Do you look at all that stuff when you're putting it together?
I don't. I mean, when you look at all that stuff when you rewrite.
Yes, the best kind
When
of
you
writing is rewriting.
when you write, all that should hopefully all that's going on subconsciously. I don't even like to think about it. And basically, all the things you're talking about, the smell, what things look like, that's because as you're writing, you're like imagining what you're writing about. So it's like you're there.
Right.
And that's why some people have to write or they go nuts because it's the only way to calm down,
Yeah.
weirdly, because things do slow down. And it does feel like a different person is writing sometimes. And I imagine I'm not a neurologist, but it's because it's a different part of your brain that's not activated when you're, talking. It's activated when you're writing.
Interesting.
And that's kind of what's too bad about all the AI stuff. It's forget about the product. The actual writing is good. Like if you think about it, when you're really, really upset about something or mad and you write down what happened, you feel better afterwards.
Yeah.
It's almost like you need to write it to get it out, you
Yeah.
know?
How do you feel, by comparison, how do you feel when you type a prompt and tweak it once? I'm not a fan of AI at this stage because I like original content. I don't think anybody's really thought this through. By definition, anything you use to generate with AI has already been written by somebody else. It's just a mashup.
Not only that, it's the complete average.
That's
It's
right.
the mean. So it's by definition going to be mediocre.
So if you're going to tell me a story about something special that happened to you when you were 10, that ain't on the internet. That's never been
Right.
published.
Not only that, if we just used AI, you'd stop having new stuff added to the AI, and then history would kind of stop because it would only be recombining what's already been written and learned. You know?
This would be a great barstool conversation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about because I'm come up from the music business. I was in the first boy band, in the 80s.
What band was that?
Huh?
Which band?
Well, I was in a band with my brothers. My last name
Uh
is
huh.
Caruso, so we were cleverly named the Caruso Brothers. We
Oh,
didn't
nice.
do any, we didn't go anywhere, but
Uh
man,
huh.
we had a good time. But I've always had music in my brainstem and vinyl, which is, would you call vinyl the series the strongest, most successful television piece that you've been involved with?
Well, I haven't been involved with very much. There's only been two things I've been involved with.
That's a pretty
So,
big home run. Vinyl did well.
yeah. And vinyl was based on, well, vinyl was great because what I did is I went around for a couple of years and interviewed all these old record guys, A&R guys, producers, guys who came from Brooklyn, started with nothing and built record companies and recorded hits. And it was great that I did in and of itself because those guys were not, they died. That's a whole generation
And
of kind of cowboys.
they didn't really have a voice. This was from a time when the Ahmet Ertegun and those guys, they didn't really do interviews and talk about themselves too
Right.
much. What year was vinyl?
Oh God, I started working on it in the mid '90s after I did the Rolling Stone stuff because that's how I met Mick Jagger, and then he was working with Scorsese, and Scorsese read Tough Jews and really liked Tough Jews, and they sort of agreed on me to go around and write it. So it was like a three-way partnership,
Wow.
and
So
and
Scorsese knew of you and liked you because he read your book on Jewish gangsters,
which was really imitating him,
which was what?
really imitating him.
Oh,
Because when I go back and read it, I hadn't quite figured out my own voice
that's like
entirely, and it was the Goodfellas narration was so strong in my head, that's why I don't know, I hopefully liked it because it's good, but also because certainly it would have fit his taste because it was so close to what he had just done. I think,
that's like another Escher drawing. I mean, we got a couple of
yeah,
things going with this. Uh, so I wanted to ask you this about vinyl. It had four, I guess, co-creators. You, Scorsese, Jagger's name is on it, and Terrence Winter.
right.
As I understand it, when these projects come together, Rich, each person brings their expertise to it.
Well,
You,
this was a weird thing. So there might be nothing else like this in that when I was hired to write it and wrote it, it was as a movie, and it was going to be like
one movie, 2 hours.
3 hours, like
Okay,
Casino. I think it was Casino in the music business is how it was sort of pitched,
okay.
and Disney was going to make it. And what
Disney.
happened is in the long period of this getting written, made, revised, that sort of kind of movie became very scarce and hard to make, and suddenly TV became the thing after The Sopranos. I remember while I was working on it, Sopranos was was on the air. And in fact, there's a Tough Jews reference in the first season of Sopranos because Tough Jews
Oh,
was like a hit, So um, anyway, so then they decided when they were ready to do it that it should be TV. And Terrence Winter came in and sort of, in my mind, this is how it happened. He sort of adapted it for television. And
so
what
back
they
to
did
my
is
question. Terrence's expertise is what?
he's just a great storyteller and a great writer, and he's involved in all those great shows and
Okay.
TV.
So
I
two
mean,
writers,
TV,
you and him.
yeah, and other people along the way, but basically me and him as creators, and Scorsese and Jagger really was involved because Jagger would live through all this more than anybody else. He knew
Yeah.
all those guys; they all courted him, and he was very close with Ahmet Ertegun. And Jagger and Ahmet Ertegun was the reason you asked how to get interviews. These people might have sat down for interviews; a lot of them wouldn't have. Jagger called them.
So
and
Jagger
earning.
helped get access to the people that you needed.
Yes,
Did
and
Scorsese
Jagger also.
direct or just produce?
Yeah, no, he directed. He directed the. Yes, he directed.
Okay.
So, and then what I wrote kind of became the pilot mostly,
Okay.
which is a big long pilot that was close to what I wrote. So, and I think that what Jagger did is when I was first writing, it was very serious, you know. And then Jagger said, you got to forget all this was silly and funny. We were laughing all the time about this stuff.
Okay.
We didn't take it all, we were kids from kind of middle class kids from London, and we're dealing with all these guys suddenly halfway around the world. And it was hilariously funny.
Yeah.
And everybody goes back and writes about it like it's this big serious thing. It wasn't. It was hysterical the whole entire time.
Well, same thing when they did the Let It Be series, because for decades everybody thought the Beatles, it was a very acrimonious split.
Right.
And until we saw the actual raw footage, they were actually enjoying recording the last album. You know, it was like a.
That's why all the music guys loved Spinal Tap so much more than any other movie. They would say that was the most accurate movie.
Yeah, which also is a reboot.
Yeah, and I actually just saw Ozzy Osbourne a clip saying that he's the only one there who knew it wasn't a documentary, that it wasn't fiction, it was a real documentary.
Oh, that's funny.
All those things actually happened,
That's
so
funny.
He said
Another Escher, a documentary
yeah.
of a real life thing.
Yeah, so that's what Jagger, because
what do they call it? Mockumentary. It was a mockumentary.
Well, because I'm writing this and then Jagger's reading it, and a lot of it's connected to him in some way. So, of course, I'm reverential because I'm like 28 years old sitting with this hero of mine about the material, and he's sort of big thing is don't be reverential. It wasn't like that. It was ridiculous.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what you're working on next?
My sister for a long time was a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office involved in art fraud.
You've got a few siblings in law.
Yeah, well, she's not anymore.
Okay.
This is from her past. And she was in civil, not criminal.
Okay.
And she had some amazing cases, like returning dinosaur bones that had been stolen from Mongolia.
Wow.
Stuff like that. And I'm working with her and some of the people she worked with on one of the bigger cases of her career.
Nice.
So that's another one where there's a lot of access because everybody wants to tell the story, and she calls them and says, please talk to my little brother.
Well, you are amazing. I'm so glad we had a chance to spend some time together. Congratulations on a great career. Congratulations on Murder in the Dollhouse and future projects. I hope we can be friends for a long time. Hang on with me for a minute after we hang up, okay?
Yep.
Rich Cohen, everybody. Rich, do you have a website, or where do you send people?
AuthorRichCohen.com.
AuthorRichCohen.com. Thank you.